Do we have sound? Perfect. Welcome to this session of Fram Talks here at Arctic Frontiers. Today we'll talk about communicating Arctic science. And if you don't know Fram Talks, it's a series of talks about science and research from the Fram Center, our host today. And the Fram Center is the High North Research Center for Climate and Environment here in Tromsø, which is a collaboration between 21 different institutions. And my name is Aksel Kjær Vidnes, and I'm the editor of Forskning.no and Science Norway. And if you don't know Forskning.no, it's the Norwegian popular science magazine, which is also the largest popular science magazine in the Nordic countries. And I'm very happy to be here today because we're going to talk about something that's very close to my heart and also very close to my head, I think. A lot of time, money, and effort goes into producing solid and important research, but that doesn't automatically translate into action. And if knowledge doesn't lead to action, we probably need to look at how it's communicated. So, one of the questions today is pretty simple and also quite difficult. How do we actually reach people with scientific knowledge in a way that makes the knowledge matter? Matter to the public, to stakeholders and decision makers, but also sometimes to very specific groups who live with the consequences of climate change or even the research that we do. So we have invited 3 researchers today to present cases and to talk about this topic. Each speaker will hold a presentation before we get a conversation here on stage and questions from the audience. So the first person that we would like to introduce today is Nelly Sofie Bodø, a researcher at the Norwegian Geotechnical Institute. She has worked on the EU-funded Reach Out project, which works at the intersection of climate data and everyday decision-making. She focuses on storytelling and how that can help people make sense of very complex climate information. So Nelly, please come up on stage and tell us all about it.
Hello, everyone. First, thank you for showing up to this session and prioritizing to hear about our projects. I have this presentation called How to Tell a Climate Story, and I hope that during this presentation you will learn a little bit a motivation for making a climate story, how you can do it, if you should do it, and what it is. So, as Aksel said, it's part of the Reach Out project, and this work is done by colleagues of mine and me at NGI, but also partners from the Foundation Climate Adaptation Services in Netherlands. So everything I present is based on the results we have from this project. Okay, so we like to start with this graphic we have here from a report from the World Bank analyzing themselves. And the title is Which World Bank Reports Are Widely Read? And nearly 1/3 of World Bank reports have never been downloaded, not even once. And only 13% have seen more than 250 downloads in their lifetime. So this kind of gives a little bit of a motivation that we should keep innovating, we should think of new ways to share our knowledge. So a little bit about the Reach Out project, which is the fundament for this talk. So this was an EU project focused about creating climate services for cities. The project was coordinated by Deltares in the Netherlands, and it started in 2021 and finished last year. So we worked with different cities around Europe, and the goal was to co-create different services and tools that could help them work with climate adaptation, and the analysis, ambition setting, and defining adaptation actions. So as you maybe see, none of these cities are in the Arctic, but we still think that the methods and tools that we worked on could be applied anywhere. And we had Lillestrøm as the Norwegian partner in this. So just first, the climate service. It's a tool that helps users apply climate knowledge to real-world decisions. And I just pasted in a lot of different examples. If you live in Norway, maybe you're familiar with our most famous climate service, which is YR. So you have climate information, and it translates it into something you can use in your everyday life. And we think that climate storytelling, it can work as a type of climate service. So this goes a little bit back to this first statistic from the World Bank report. We have, on one side, we have the climate knowledge supply, where we have researchers. They know a lot. You have all this valuable information. On the other side, you have those who are going to use the climate information. So this could be societal organizations, decision makers, or even just citizens. And in between, we find what we call the valley of death. So how do you get information from the climate knowledge supply to the climate service demand? So we need to bridge the gap. And in the Reach Out project, we tried to do this using storytelling and trying to make the climate knowledge, make it personal, make it emotional, so that it's more relatable to those who should use it, and see if then it can have a bigger impact and can be usable in practice. So we defined this definition of a climate story, and probably you can make your own. It's not like this is the one right way to do it, but this is what we did. We have a climate story. It is a story. You have some characters. You have visuals. It could be pictures, video, something else. And you have a message that you want to share with an audience. So to make it a bit more clear, I have an example. So this is the climate story from Cork City Council. And they have made a video based on their story. And they want to share with their citizens what the city council is doing to adapt the city to flooding. So let's see if I can start the video. Yeah.
Ah, sure, isn't it heavenly by the river?
Oh, it is, Gran, and you're never far from one in Cork.
Closer than you'd think. You know this city is built on rivers. Even the name Corky means marsh.
Really?
Yeah? When the first settlers arrived here, it was only a series of wetlands and islands.
But hasn't Cork always flooded?
Yeah, but the settlers were used to adapting. They built on raised layers of clay, and over the centuries, as the city grew, more permanent buildings were constructed, and they filled in the rivers, or they built culverts to let the water flow under the streets until the city was left with just 2 main waterways.
But the city can flood so badly. Remember in 2009, whole sections of the city were submerged. The tap water and electricity were cut for ages, long after the floods had cleared.
Cork has always flooded. It's the nature of the city. And we've to prepare for even more. Global warming is warming the air, which means stormier weather and more rain.
We've noticed that, all right.
At the City Council, we've been making huge efforts to address this.
Like what?
Well, look behind you. The Marina Park has been constructed as one big basin and floodplain.
I had no idea. That's amazing.
Yeah, we're involved in a European project with UCC that's developing ways of predicting rising sea levels and mapping the areas most at risk from flooding.
Oh?
But it's not only up to the council. It's crucial for us all to be more proactive. There are simple things we don't realise we could do, which also have direct effects.
Well, what can the likes of me do to have a direct effect?
Well, Gran, anything that slows down and spreads groundwater gives more time for the ground to soak it in. Simple things really do help, like planting more trees and shrubs, avoiding covering gardens or yards in concrete, and planning for rain runoff when you build. Change is constant. We have to learn to adapt and work together towards our shared goal.
You don't need to tell me about adapting, love. I used to change this fella's nappies, and now look at him. Erskoa Kayla a Voranadina.
Huh?
It's in the shelter of each other we live.
Yeah, so that was one example of a climate story. And there are many ways to do this. So I will now try to talk a little bit about our process that we used to create a climate story and give some tips and tricks in case you want to do this yourself. And since we are a bit limited on time, you can also, if you want all the details, you can go to our guide, How to Build a Climate Story, which is free and open online. So the first thing we started with when we were making the climate stories is we asked the cities, why do you want to make a climate story? What is your motivation for this? And we found that they had many different reasons why they would like to make a climate story. So some wanted to show their citizens what they are doing with nature-based solutions, for example. Some of them want to encourage their citizens to take action, maybe to implement some adaptation measures on their property or sign up for extreme weather alerts. Athens, for example, wanted to disseminate their climate action plan. And in general, they wanted to raise awareness of climate hazards. So based on this motivation, we had to go to the next step, which is to define the target audience. Who do you want to reach with this message? And I think this could be very many different groups. Somehow all the cities ended up with the same group in each process, which was they wanted to engage the general public, so quite a broad group. Some of them were a little bit more specific. For example, they wanted to focus on children, or they wanted to focus on people who owned properties. So after we decided on this, we were planning the co-creation process. So in this project, we were working together with the city right from the start. And I won't go super into detail on this figure, but we had the knowledge brokers, which would be me and my colleagues, who are actually putting together the climate story, gathering the data, and so on. And then we have the city representative, which was someone working in the city who was also working in the Reach Out project. So this person who was working in the city, they would know the local context, and they would be responsible for integrating city stakeholders. For example, this could be their colleagues working in different departments of the city, or it could be citizens, and to get their input and integrate them in the process. And what we learned was that storytelling was a new concept to all the cities we worked with, which meant that we had to build a shared understanding of what is a climate story and how do we make it. So it ended up with being many iterations, where you first make a draft, then you develop it, get some feedback, make the second version, and so on, until you have a product which everyone is happy with. We have some learning experiences from this co-creation process, and I think the top one, it's a bit motivating that everyone we worked with found this to be a fun and engaging process, and they saw it as a good way to share complex information with their citizens. Still, they found it easier, the city representatives, to include other colleagues into this process, and hard to include the citizens directly. The ones who managed, they already had some sort of mechanism in place to get feedback from citizens, but many were worried about, for example, the time it would take, or if something was politically sensitive. However, many said the main thing they got out of the project was to have increased collaboration across departments. So climate adaptation, usually a city will not have a climate adaptation department, but you will maybe have one person working in planning, one person working in health, one in education, and you need to bring these people together, and they saw this as a good way to do that. Okay, then the next step is to design the story, and we split it into these two main parts. We have the narrative or the storyline, and then we have the visuals. So the first thing we did was to develop the narrative. First, to make a structure of the story. So this would be, who is your main character, for example? What challenges do they have to overcome? And what is the main message you want the the target audience to go home with. After you decided on this, we made a storyboard, which is similar to maybe this figure here, which gives like the overall look and feel of the story. And then in the end, you can make the specific dialogue and text. And then for the visuals. So we have different cities, they did different things, so I will give you some examples of this. The first one is to work with an illustrator, and as you've seen, like many of these images in the slides, they are by the same illustrator who made the climate story for Logroño in Spain. And every city who did this said it was really important to find a local illustrator, someone who could anchor the story locally, because then it would be more impactful. You could also use photos. So for Lillestrøm, we used a lot of historical photos. And you can find these, for example, by asking museums. And they are usually really helpful, and they have a lot of good material. You could also send out a photographer, or you can ask newspapers to buy some of their pictures. So this is an image showing a flood in 1967 in Lillestrøm, which is I think it's a quite nice image. You can also use video, either historical or you could film people. I think if you have some real people in your story, it can really make it more emotional and personal. This is an example from the same flood event, and the reporter is asking this man, do you want to evacuate from your house now that it's flooded, it's standing this deep in water? And the man says, no, it's okay, I can anchor my boat to the chimney. So I think this can be a good thing to add to your story. Then about the graphs. Here are two different ways of presenting the same material. So I would say this is the same graph in two figures, and one is not necessarily better than the other one. Here on the left, you show the number of heatwave days per year for Milano. And on the x-axis, you have the year. On the y-axis, you have the number of days. So you see, like, as the time passes, you get more and more of these. Then for the climate story, they wanted to adapt this a little bit. So they worked with the local illustrator. So instead of having the specific years on the x-axis, you should see this little girl growing older. And instead of just showing the exact number of days, you show the idea that it's getting hotter and hotter. And they also add this third element, that it's linked to urbanization, and you have more and more buildings as it gets hotter and hotter. So I'd say, again, like, one is not necessarily better, but it depends who you are trying to reach. Here's another example about adaptation measures. Here you can see as time goes, it gets also hotter and hotter. You have more and more of these small suns, but also the shade from the tree grows bigger and bigger, which is quite nice. We also used some interactive maps. Many of the stories were in ArcGIS story maps, which makes it easy to integrate this type of content. So this map, it's from Athens, and they have this aim that by 2030, 70% of the citizens should have no more than 15 minutes to walk to a green space where they can cool down. So we have this in the background. It's a map of Athens with their green space here. And then we have added a map on top, which shows the walking distance to green space. So what they can now do in the municipality is, when they are working in these workshops with the planners and so on, they can bring out these maps. Maybe they want to make a new park. Okay, maybe we should put it in one of these red areas where people have the furthest to walk so that we can reach the goals of our climate adaptation plan. So the climate stories ended up in many different shapes as the end product. So all of them had an ArcGIS story map, and then we saw some of the cities really wanted to make more or make an adapted version, which is when we got, for example, this video from Cork. Some of them also made specific, like a fanzine. If you don't know, it's like a brochure cartoon thing you can just fold open and show. And it was really inspirational, I think, to see that they were taking ownership over their own story at the end of the project. So I put our climate stories as stepping stones. What can they do with the climate stories? I mean, of course, you can just put it out there through a link, and then maybe someone will open it and read it, maybe not. So for example, in Lillestrøm, they used the climate story as a motivation to have a news article where they encourage their citizens with like concrete things they can do on their properties to make it more climate resilient. So this was an article giving like you can remove stones in your backyard, you can take the drainage away from the wall of the house and so on. In Logroño, they had a climate detectives campaign. They wanted to reach children. So they went through the climate story to give a bit of background. And then they took the kids out and they went and measured the temperature in some built-up areas and in some parks and made their own little worksheet to see how are these connected. And here's a picture from Milano at one of the events the city is a part of. Maybe it's the Milano Green Week, I think. And there they brought these maps in big scale and they used them to start discussions with their citizens and to get their inputs on these. So then I end with this slide, which is hopefully can start some thought processes with you guys. How could you use storytelling for your own work? Thank you.
Do we have sound? There it is. Thank you, Nelly, for sharing your interesting work. Nelly will be back here on stage soon, but first we're going to hear from our next speaker. Laura Prirar, she is a postdoc at Aquaplan Niva. She works in the SLICE project on stressors affecting polar bears and whales. And she will introduce us to how quite advanced laboratory science can be communicated beyond the scientific community. Please, Laura Prirar, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. So, do you hear me? Yeah?
No.
No sound? Yeah. Perfect. So, thank you all for being here. It is my pleasure today to share with you a bit of my work. I've been here for 2 years, and I'd like to first dive with you all in the cold fjords of Norway. If you drive 4 hours north from here, you can assist this amazing and quite spectacular phenomenon every winter. Whales go in those fjords, and they're here for one thing: herrings. And what we see is they're not the only one interested. This video was taken last year in Skjervøy, where you can see a fishing boat bringing up a massive amount of herrings in their nets. And you see birds, you see whales. In brief, you see a lot of interactions between human and wildlife. But these interactions are not always positive. Here, I brought up 2 visual examples. For example, boat traffic. And we know that in areas where there's a lot of traffic, animal cetaceans are stressed. Another invisible threat could be chemicals that are released from the industry, for example. So from all those interactions come a question: what's our impact on this megafauna? And this question is essential, but it's actually super hard to answer. But I believe this is our responsibility as scientists to work on it and communicate it, of course. But why this question is so hard to answer? Well, when you work with wildlife and, for example, marine mammals, you cannot just do as you would do in a lab with having a control group and having an exposed group. You would expose it to stressors, and then you would compare the control with the exposed group. Of course, we cannot do that in our case. So we need alternatives. And that's where it becomes interesting. With this fragment that you can see here, it's just a piece of skin and fat. We can get a lot of information from those animals about their health status, notably. And here comes the SLICE project I'm involved in. In SLICE, we collect small fractions of the whales, and we slice it in small pieces that we keep alive in the lab. And we have a twin project called Marma Detox, based mainly in Bergen, where they do exactly the same, but focusing on the skin, where they can detach the cells and also keep them alive in the lab. And there it's come something interesting. There you can apply stressors. Then you can mimic what's happened in the wild, but in the lab. And for the rest of this presentation, I will mainly focus on SLICE because I've been mostly involved in that part. So SLICE is international, mainly based in Tromsø in here, but also we have a lot of collaboration with Belgium, south of Norway, the UK, Spain, and even the US. SLICE has been created by Pierre Blevin, who's a senior researcher in Aquaplan IVA. And SLICE is also composed of young scientists, as I like to include myself in. So we have myself as a postdoc. We also have 3 PhD students and 2 master students. And so I would like now to show you a bit of how we communicated our work so far. And starting with the first phase, yeehaw, we got funded. So to show the scientific community that we started this project, we published an article in the Fram forum showing the goals of the SLICE project, and we also organized a kickoff meeting with the whole collaborators. And quick after that, we started fieldwork. So for fieldwork, we went in the fjords, we collected those small fragments of skin and fat, and we did it on several species of cetaceans. And then we have this constraint. I told you, we want the tissue to be alive in the lab, meaning we want it to be alive also before when we're on field work. So basically, we want it as fresh as possible in the lab. So for that, we need to get back to Tromsø, where the labs are located, very quickly. But you may have experienced yesterday, the weather is not always in our favor. And so for that, we built a strong collaboration with local whale-watching companies, which are doing the back and forth travel from Tromsø to the fjords every day during the intense season. And they've been extremely collaborative with us and enabled us to bring back the samples very quickly to the lab. And fieldwork, of course, is always a good way to capture and then to share our experience. And for that, we've been very lucky to have in our team Audun Rikardsen, who's a professor at UIT here in Tromsø, but he's also a professional photographer. And so from all his footage, we've been able to document our work. Among that, Audun can also place cameras on the top of whales for a temporary amount of time, and it brings us to places we would never see in other circumstances. We can know how whales interact with each other, for example, but we can know how they interact with us. And from all this fieldwork experience, then we ask ourselves the question, how do we communicate that with a non-scientific audience? And for that, we've been really lucky to have a US Fulbright scholar, Audrey Sue, who was there for about a year and mainly based in Bergen, related to Marma Detox. And she made a video out of the field work we had and the lab work. And this video was further disseminated in local museums like Polaria, but also in the partner whale-watching companies, which is also a nice way to make tourists aware of the situation here. And here is a snapshot of this video so you can see how it looks like.
The Marma Detox Project is an international research project that aims to address all of these challenges using cell cultures. Our goal is to understand the effects of ocean pollutants on large marine mammals in a way that is efficient for the researcher and ethical for the animal. To do this, we partner with another research project called SLICE, who takes small skin and blubber biopsies from whales in the wild. We then use skin pieces from those biopsies to create cell cultures. We can use these cells to study effects of pollution in marine mammals in ways we never could before.
Marma Detox and SLICE are sister projects in that we are both trying to understand the specific effect of chemical pollution on large marine mammals. In the SLICE project, we want to focus on the tissue level by keeping alive bloodless slices to further expose them to pollutants and stress hormones. To obtain our sample, we use DAR to take small biopsy from wild whales, just below their dorsal fin. So far, we have been able to collect biopsy from fin whale, humpback whale, and killer whale. After we collect the biopsy, we store them in a sterile container and ship them to the lab for experimentation.
So here we are growing killer whale cells, fibroblasts, from skin biopsies, and they're looking good.
So in the SLICE project, the slices are exposed to the mixture of pollutants and cortisol, which is a type of stress hormone. And they do this to study how the slices respond to a combination of both pollution and stress. So Marma Detox and SLICE are together optimizing the usage of each biopsy, where SLICE uses the blubber for slicing and Marma Detox uses the skin part for establishing cell cultures.
And so, in addition to cetaceans, SLICE also work on another very charismatic animal, polar bears. So even though humans are not so present, in the Arctic, their impact is quite visual. And to sample on polar bears, we had this amazing opportunity to work on this Norwegian research vessel, the Kronprins Haakon, where we could build our own lab and make the method I described to you earlier. And so we went on a cruise in April around south of Svalbard, and with an experienced vet, we could sample on polar bears with the Norwegian Polar Institute during their yearly monitoring program. And so we could have some fragments of fat and skin from polar bears, and we were lucky to have with us on the boat a professional journalist from the French press agency who made a documentary out of our work. So here again is a snapshot of it, and you can see the vet anesthetizing a polar bear from the helicopter. Here is the collection of this small portion of fat and skin, and very freshly back to the lab, we could process those tissue and skin in a very nice environment, I must say. So from this documentary, we got disseminated quite far, from Brazil to New Zealand, Japan, Norway, and the US, among others. In addition to this documentary, we also shared our work through local TV news, radio, and also through newspapers in Norway, but also abroad. Frequent updates were made on social media to try to sensitize people to what we were doing. And we even made a side exhibit called Elida, the poisoned whale. So Elida is a killer whale calf that was found dead on the fjords of Norway. But what was intriguing is that Elida contained levels of contaminant way higher than we were expected. And so to aware people on this issue, an exhibit was made, and a student from UIB even created a reproduction of Elida in a curfin. And it was interactive in the sense that children could write small notes and place them in the curfin if they wanted. There were also explanatory panels to explain the situation. And this work was made in collaboration with Marma Detox, the University of Bergen, and also the Norwegian Orca Survey. And so now here we are. We went on fieldwork, we produced data, we analyzed them, and we have results. So what are we going to do with it? Well, we want to share them in a way that makes sense for us. So using the FAIR principle, meaning having data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. One of our targets are, of course, people from the scientific community. And so for that, SLICE and Marma Detox have been involved in already published articles, and the whole team is working on papers in preparation. For those papers, we want to reach highly ranked international and open access journals. And we also participate to conferences nationally but also internationally. And in fact, in October, we will organize a workshop on the specific methods we're using to spread and to give the knowledge we have to other labs that would be interested in doing the same. And those conferences are also a nice way to highlight the tremendous amount of work of the young scientists we have in our team. We even got prizes for presentations and posters, which also highlight the interest of the community to our projects. We got several posters, and by the way, the very last one will be presented tonight by Thea. So if you're interested in more of the science part, go to her poster. Another target we want to reach are also management stakeholders. So from our results, we want to get a visibility through programs like AMAP, but also Milieu Directorate, to potentially reach decision makers and having an impact on discussions related to the toxicity of contaminant, Stockholm Convention, the REACH compliance, and so on. And last but not least, we want to share the results with the public. But how do we do that? How do we reach the non-scientific public? Well, we could use different channels like Science Norway, or also focus on young minds using those journals specific for kids, for example. And as we did at the beginning of the project, we could also write a summary article in Fram Forum. But to be honest, I don't really have a precise answer to this question, because it's really hard to know how we get the public. What do they want to know? Do they want positive news? And it's hard to know our impact. So I'll be happy to discuss that with you all. Thank you very much for your attention. It was a pleasure to share my work with you, and we can discuss that further later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, and we'll see you again shortly. But first, our last speaker is Kari Anne Bråten, Professor of Community Ecology at the Arctic University of Norway here in Tromsø. She has studied the changes of the tundra and the threatening spread of crowberries. And if you don't know what crowberries is in Norwegian, it's krekling. At least I got a few surprises when I read about her work and the difficulties with this plant. She'll tell us more about these difficulties, and also the difficulties in spreading the knowledge about this plant and a change in approach she had to do. So please, the stage is yours.
So I enjoyed 2 talks, quite professional. Mine is going to be a bit more personal, I guess, because I'm going to tell a story that is going 23 years back from when I discovered the phenomena, and I thought everybody would be taken for granted, or that the interest that I found in it would be, I took it for granted that others would also be interested. So I have called it Communicating Evergreening of the Arctic, because the phenomena over time discovered was needing a wording to specify it. But I'll come to that. So this is a mix of the scientific progress we did and the shift in my take on how to communicate this. So the first phase, I called it Waking Up and Taking Interest for Granted. And what you just see here is a heath close to Porsangerfjord in northern Norway, where there grows a lot of crowberry. But I didn't know this at the time when this started. So this was in 2003, and it was the start of what we know now as COAT, Climate Ecological Observatory of the Arctic Tundra, COAT. What we did is we put up registrations across 20 reindeer districts in northern Norway because we wanted to know what was the species composition of reindeer pastures. Because at that time, people were claiming a lot about how reindeer husbandry was taking down the quality of their pastures, and this caused the decrease in weight of their calves, and there was all these stories, but very little knowledge. And what we also did is we did not steer where to go and access the pastures. We did it totally random. So here you can see 3 very different types of pastures, with the very barren ones, with most stones and gravel, then very typical crowberry heath, and then very lush meadows towards the coast. What did we find? Something that made me quite frustrated, because there was so much of this particular one plant, crowberry. And we were quite a lot of people gathering these data. I think we were something like 18 different people. And it was the same claim across all 18. You know, there's just so much crowberry. We're so tired of registering this plant. Okay, let's do more focused design. Let's focus on those habitats where we are much more likely to gather information about the palatable plants for reindeer husbandry, and to see, you know, what's the composition of those, where probably also the reindeer go and graze most. And to our surprise, again, the finding was that crowberry makes up, this time, a bit less, but really not far from the random design, because we were still close to 40%, but now it's 35%. And then it dawned upon me, I need to learn more about this plant, don't I? There's something about this, what's going on? Or why is it that it is so common? And that was a very interesting tour for me, because I learned that it was what we could call an allelopathic plant, or there were discussions about whether it was or not. And an allelopathic plant is a plant that biochemically interferes with that of other organisms. It was very much linked to one compound, beta-tacin 3. I've later learned that there's a bunch of different compounds, and maybe beta-tacin 3 is not the most important. But anyway, we took this compound, and from other studies and our own, we learned, for instance, that compound alone could affect brown trout, york, and freshwater runoff from Empetrum heath, and killing off york, meaning that simply the runoff water across Empetrum or crowberry fields would accumulate so much of these compounds in the waters that it affected the fish. Also, we did some bioassays inspired by others that told that these compounds were important. And so we did petri dishes where we simply put out seeds of a range of different organisms, and both looked at the germination of those seeds and how the seedlings were growing. And we found that that compound alone, or if we just put leaves of crowberry below the filter paper, it didn't take many days before either the seeds did not germinate, or if they did, the root tips went brown. And if we just had water, we had very healthy developing roots. And then we did an experiment with a master student, taking in soils from outdoors and bringing it to a phytotron here in Tromsø, and testing how did the seedlings of very common pasture plants develop in that soil without being treated, or being treated by either reindeer fishes that we mixed into the soil, or we actually burnt it. And you can see that really helped, because the untreated soil, they were hardly growing, but they were really helped out. Turning out, we learned that it was most probably because of the absorbing possibilities of both charcoal and reindeer fishes. So well, so good. I had learned something, and I thought, gosh, this is disturbing, isn't it? We have this plant, and it's so common. How has it been before? Has it always been this common? But definitely it's there, and it's not positive to the pastures, is it? So when I was asked to sit in a working group for the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, I thought, I'll say yes, and I really tell them about this phenomenon. So here I start communicating, right? They were not so interested in plants. They were not so interested in pastures. Still, I was in the group, and I decided I'll stay on, and I'll write about this phenomenon. And that's how successful I was. So my frustration did not get any help. And I guess I got stubborn from this, because I thought, they don't understand. Why don't they understand this is important? And I really tried to explain the phenomenon and these things, but it was kind of, there's so much for us to care about ecological criteria for reindeer husbandry. You know, don't come here with even another aspect. So I need to go to the second phase. And I started to work on communicating, because I thought somebody should wake up and feel this. And I was in contact with people in the directory. I had this contact to the ministry. I was frustrated all the time. I was called quite monoman at this time, I think. And I got this nickname, Crowberry Lady. Imagine. And I thought, you know, they call me Lady at least. We were lucky. I got a PhD student, Victoria Gonzalez. She got 4 kids. I was very happy that she got 4 kids during her PhD, because this plant worked in the long term. And with her, we discovered quite a lot of things. For instance, that this plant can look all dead, but then it has small parts, and that's what she's pointing at, that are green. And so at the end of the summer, this plant that looked all brown will be green again. So we actually found that, contrary to what had been communicated in other publications, that it was vulnerable, because that stopped at this point. We could say, no, it's not vulnerable. It can really be encased in ice, and it does fine. We looked into long-term effects. So here you can see 4 plots where Empetrum was removed about 10 years earlier, and it was still visible. And we did studies on snowbeds, where we could see that snowbeds surrounded by crowberry heath, they had a lot of leaves of crowberries in them, and where the leaves of Empetrum, despite that it was maybe 50 meters away from where it was growing, they still had an effect. So I thought, people will be interested now. I'll show you. So I did science.no, and I told them about the green desert. I thought, that will work. That is a nice way of punching it. I don't know if it's ever been read or whatever. I did quite heavy, I'd been to many conferences, was still invited by the directorate and these, and I talked about this phenomena in many different settings. And I started to use this picture because I realized they were very engaged in what predators are doing. And then I said, if you're interested in this animal, I should tell you, you should also be interested in this plant. So I felt, I have these ways of communicating. And I did this one, the tundra analog of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Because I realized if I talked about crowberry, people thought about the berry. Whereas all that I've been talking about until now for you guys is the leaves of the plant. So the leaves are toxic, but not the berries. They are delicious, and they are even picked by reindeer, and they are pooed by reindeer and other animals because they are very light, but they then help them spread, right? And I use this picture. Here is cloudberry surrounded by Empetrum. And I don't think this plant will ever germinate anew in this field. Trying to explain it matters. At the same time, I didn't really know, okay, we find this coverage of the plant and I realize it's all over. I have this gut feeling it's spreading, but I don't know. I haven't documented this. And then we really need to work for getting new money. But in that, I also tried, this communication, and I had this the green desert approach, And I also tried to get into, chronicles in the media and, talk about this phenomena to a broader audience. And I was told, Karianne, as much as interest you have in this, I just don't think people in Konglefjord, where you grew up, would be interested in your story. Sorry. So, you had to take this. You could lick your wounds and you can go home and give up. Or you could be very stubborn, like I guess I am. And I got this in Aftenposten, a small debate part. And I don't think many people read it. And I even used the elephant in the title to get people's attention. Okay. Not being stubborn, applying for more money, and being successful in that. And really shifting the take on it. Because I was thinking, okay, if the top level of who should really be interested in how pastures are developing and what it is that reindeer husbandry and wildlife in general are coping with out there, if the plants are not interesting to them, and the audience in large think this is an interesting story, yeah, but they don't really see why it is important, and I try to communicate this and I don't reach out, then I thought, okay, what if, of course, I really just focus on the stakeholders that live of that land, that are herders of that land with their animals, which are sheep farmers and reindeer herders. And if they are interested in this, let's start from there. Just calm down and take it stepwise from there. And it helped, of course, to have this project, and we called it To Manage or Not, Assessing the Benefit of Managing Ecosystem Disservices. So, of course, Empetrum or crowberry has a service with its berries, but it definitely has a lot of disservices that it takes down the fertility of pastures. What we did, it was a two-part project. So it was a scientist-based, where we revisited the areas that we had, where we found 40% of Empetrum covering. And then it was a stakeholder part, where we asked the herders, now that you know this about Empetrum, is there land in your, where you have your animals that you would like to change in a way that you take back and make it more biodiverse and make it more palatable to the animals? And this would be areas where there would be some say that it was likely not Empetrum earlier. It has come in later times. And what was very important then, for instance here with Johan Martin Eira in Kvænangen, he chose his calving grounds. They were all covered by Empetrum now. He thought, no, it hasn't been like this always. And for my part, he said, it's easier to burn. But then there were some herders that found other techniques, mechanical removal and adding some soil, improving material, so lots of other things. So while they were doing this, the results from the scientific part ticked in. And now the study design with these 20 districts is still behind. And you can see the biomass in gray. It's what we found in 2003. And in colored, green colors, it was what we found in 2020. And just for the record, forbs and gramineae is what plants that are most nutritious to the animals. The woody plants are not as, in general, not as nutritious. So you can already see that they have little of what is most palatable. And then you can see that the deciduous woody, those that are losing their leaves every fall, they increased somewhat. But what was really increasing was crowberry. And it was just astonishing to see how much that changed, because now it was not 40% anymore. It was more like 55% coverage. And that change was only in the last 20 years. And so what we did here was we find greening of the Arctic, which also crowberry increase would be, but we called it evergreening, to disentangle it, because it's a very different process, because what it does is it kind of creates that green desert. And importantly also, we found that, and to make this focus on the lower right figure, this is where we have crowberry, and you can see the gray line, and you can see the blue line. So along that y-axis is the increase in biomass over those last 20 years, whereas along the x-axis it's reindeer numbers, and you can see that they just didn't have anything to do with this. And that was kind of surprising. We thought animals would push this process. And all the different lines are the different reindeer districts. So some had decreased their reindeer densities, some had stayed zero, and some had increased over those last 20 years. And either way, it didn't matter. It was independent of reindeer density, the way we found that increment. So no relationship with animal density. And as a researcher, I thought, people need to know this. It's very important. Still very frustrated. So in that project, we also had resource bioeconomic modelers. And they found that management of Impetrum has long-term economic benefit, and they did this through the interviews of the herders. We also had another design that we could use. We could revisit some areas that were documented by a Finnish guy called Hapasari. He's still living, he just does not want to. He was so tired of registering Impetrum, maybe way back to 50 years. So he's not been in contact with him, but we could use all his data to visit areas. Okay, so for some reason, all the color got out of... Sorry, technical issue here. I want to go back. One? Yeah, so, okay, it doesn't have a color. That was strange. Anyway, how did I manage to make a slide without colors? What it showed was that we had all this Betula, Calluna, Impetrum, Bertillus, which is blueberry, and other 6 different types of heathlands 50 years back. And now they were all Impetrum lands. So, this caused what we would call a biotic homogenization. Everything becomes more similar. So, working with herders, we thought, we need to access these cautious, ethical ways that we need to be careful who you are when we document, what we're doing in this project. Turning out, they did not think that was important. They were with us, making op-eds and discussing. And we had 2 business mentors. This is Adrian Smith, a sheep farmer. The other one was Jan Ivar Smuk. And from their work, we learned that the soils beneath where Impetrum was growing in was really fertile, motivating, turning the soils. Being a bit serious, understanding that there's a lot of things to take in, trying to communicate Impetrum is not easy. You need to have the listeners through quite some logic steps. Because of this, we made a story map. And now I will have some help just scanning through. And this was because we thought, if you have easy accessible, very, very much information interpreted into a text that was very readable, you could potentially easier understand what this phenomenon was for. So it was mixed for different audiences, for the specially interested ones, of course. Okay, thank you. And then what also happened is a PhD student made this to the school laboratories. And we got help explaining this, and it ended up being very popular among teachers. So now there's several hundred pupils that have learned the effect that Impetrum or crowberry can have on other organisms, which is quite fantastic. So suddenly things started to work, right? And then national media got the story map. We have this phenomena, we think it's important, and we made this story map. You read that and see if not this would be interesting to put in, for instance, in NRK. And they said, yeah, we'll take it. And it went on net, on radio and television. I've even been in South Korea. I don't know what they learned from that. And finally, we did an animation film. And now I'm on overtime, but it's on in both Norwegian and it is in Sami. It's a 4-minute long video to just explain how it works through and provide it as an easy explanation of the phenomena.
Et fargeflor av urter, gress og lyngplanter, summing fra humler, ei rype i det fjerne, reinsdyr som nyt beiteroen. Mange arter som samla holder hverandre i sjakk. Dette landskapet inneholder også krekling. Denne planten verdt et nærmere bekjentskap.
Okay, thank you. So there you go. A bit of action here, right? And also in the Sami. And I just got the feedback from the Sami herders. They were very satisfied with that translation that was there. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karianne Bråten. And you can just stay here, and then we'll get Laura Prirard and Nelly Bodhi back on stage. And I think we'll just sort of create some space for you around here, if that's possible. And then you have a microphone here. And I would very much like to open up for some questions from the audience, but I'll just start us off. You can just think if there's anything you would like to ask the panel. I was wondering when, because you have sort of the longest sort of, we're talking about a lot of stories here, and you have sort of the longest sort of storyline going, and looking back at your whole process of finding out how to communicate. Do you have sort of an advice to yourself, looking back, that you would like to have known when you started out? Would you have done anything differently?
I hope I would have started with the ones that would be most interested, that would live off it in a way, like what's in it for me. Not trusting authorities, thinking they would take it on. I was very naive for a very long time. And now, you know, you need to, if it's not important for those that live of it, why should authorities care in a way? So I shifted that whole focus, and I think I want to advise everybody to start there. Or at least myself, of course.
Yeah, because you also want, but you want to still, I assume, sort of create action within the authorities as well, still.
Yeah, I find that notoriously difficult.
Yeah. And why is that?
I wish I've been thinking that needs its own research project. And, you know, it's a plant. We're not thinking of plants as being agents. I couldn't use the term invasive because it's a native plant. I didn't have any, you know, cheap ways in a way. And you have to compete with the more urgent matters always. So I think, you know, there's a concept called plant blindness. So I think it's a bit hit by that, and it just takes very solid work.
Is it considered boring?
Yeah, I think it's considered boring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because whenever I talk about krekling, it's like people, they've seen the plant, but they don't really know what it is. Yeah. And you mentioned a sort of important word, Laura, I thought, when you said it, because you talked about charismatic animals. And what do you think sort of having to deal with a charismatic topic or animal has to do with how the public responds?
Can you hear me?
Is it on?
I guess it is.
8.
Yeah, okay.
Let's try again.
Yep, right now.
Still not on. Shall we just try this one instead? And that is number 7.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, can you repeat the
Yeah,
question?
sorry. Because the Krekling, the Crabbery is sort of
It's not charismatic.
is not a very charismatic topic, but you talked about charismatic animals, and can you explain what is a charismatic animal, and what does it has to do with how people respond to your science communication?
Yeah, for sure. So I think a charismatic animal comes when, if you locate a place, they will think about this animal. You think about the Arctic, you would think polar bears, you would maybe think about walrus, and so on. And those are animals you associate immediately to a place. And of course, because these animals could be usually top predators, and you mentioned also this top predator and also food relationship, and that's right, top predators are charismatic in the sense they're at the top of the food chain, and I think it attracts a lot of curiosity from the public. So for sure it helps when I communicate with even like friends or any non-scientific people. They feel directly connected because, oh yes, I saw it on TV and I saw a documentary about it, and so you can easily find connections with the audience, I feel like.
And Nelly, you're sort of the expert on telling stories here and how to communicate. Do you think we all need that sort of charismatic topic to be able to sort of make the people understand what we're talking about?
I mean, I thought it was very interesting to hear about the uncharismatic crowberry. So I definitely don't think you need a charismatic topic, but it's probably easier to engage if it's something people are familiar with already, or they already have some relationship with. And if not, then maybe it can be a fun challenge to be a bit more creative. Yeah.
What's your experience? What do people respond to the most?
I think at least for our project with climate, it's when they can put themselves in the situation. If you have these maps that are very broad, it doesn't spark as much interest. If you can zoom in and see, like, here is my house, here is my workplace, here is my school, and this is happening here, then it definitely makes people more engaged. It makes it more tangible and more interesting, I think.
And all your work, it has sort of a connection to something that is quite politicized and can also be quite controversial, because people have different opinions when it comes to climate change, environmental issues. Do you think you have to sort of adapt in the way that you talk about it, depending on how it can be perceived, and it can be perceived as political? Laura, I'll start with you.
To be honest, first, I don't communicate so much with the public. As a postdoc, I'm in the lab or in my office or sometimes on field work. So that's also a kind of a barrier. Personally, if I had to communicate with a large audience, I would stick to facts, and I would not necessarily, rephrase depending on the audience I have. And I assume it's the way that is the most reliable way, but I don't have much experience with that.
But how is that for you? Because when you showed us that video of Cork, and I thought that it's very sort of easy to understand the local part of it, and what we can do as inhabitants in the city to prevent flooding. But then you also mentioned, or they mentioned, but the reason that it's becoming more interesting now is because of climate change. And I was just wondering, does that sort of hinder that communication? Or do you have any thoughts on how to sort of do that in a clever way?
My experience working with the cities, where they were not worried to mention climate change, like they see it as a fact they can share, and if they have the good data to back it up. But they were very careful about what they say, how they say it.
In what way?
For example, for Cork, they are making a lot of these flood measures. Many people don't want them, for example, because you have to build stuff, maybe you lose some access to the river. And if they say, so I think a lot of these cities, they're scared to say the wrong thing, because then there will be local organizations, maybe local media will pick this up. So we had to go many rounds, make sure that it's correct, it's somehow inspirational, it's saying what you want to say, but maybe in like a nice way. So I think this is also because it was coming from the city, from the municipality. If it comes from someone as a person, maybe you can be a little bit more direct. Yeah.
And Karianne, you have, if I'm not wrong, you have sort of a double political difficulty, because you're both talking about climate change, which is quite a hot topic, and a lot of people agree and disagree. But then you also talk about something that can be quite controversial in parts of Norway, which is reindeer herding. And I noticed that you say a little bit about that it wasn't the increase or decrease in the reindeer herds that affected this development. It is climate change.
It's associated at least to changes in climate, so we think it's
Yeah.
an important driver.
But do you find it difficult to talk about when it has the sort of political sides to it as well?
Yes, because it becomes more complex. So I tried in this talk to not take in the reindeer story so much. Maybe I could have made the whole presentation on a very political issue, and that is, why is it that we manage these pastures based on animal density alone when it's not the driver of the changes. So it's highly political, but again, I don't see that politicians are taking it up. I think we need more evidence in a way, or understand it better. I think it's just so culturally embedded in people, the way things are, that there are too many reindeer still. It's a kind of a cultural thing that we think this. I honestly don't think that. I think it's too much of plants that are taking over the pastures, making it impossible, not only for reindeer husbandry, but also for sheep husbandry. So what I'm saying is, maybe that's also a problem in communicating, that you try too many stories at the same time, and you don't know which one to prefer in a way.
Is there also a geographical issue here? Because now we're talking about Arctic issues, and looking at Arctic issues from the Arctic, and looking at Arctic issues from the south, where most politicians in Norway, most media outlets are based, my own as well. Is there something there that there's sort of like an Arctic blindness, not just a plant blindness amongst Norwegian decision makers?
Absolutely, and we have the Artsdatabanken. So they have for long red-listed vegetation type that becomes more common because Petrum is making heathlands. So welcome to my frustration. And that's, it's like that in the south. Yeah, it's a vulnerable type. But here it becomes more common. And still, for the new red list, Petrum is not really mentioned as a threatening organisms to our biodiversity, which for me goes like, what more can I do? And I know people are talking about it, but it's a lot of frustration over these years that has built up. And it's, you become angry and then you communicate very badly. So, no, there's absolutely this on top of it.
Okay, so, we have a question, and if that microphone works, then we'll use it. Well, let's try again, because it's number, is it 8? Yeah. Let's try again.
Hello? No? But I can project.
Yeah, but the thing is,
we need. Oh no! Here we go.
We have people on stream, and they would like to hear the question as well. So,
no, I actually just had a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question for Karianne.
Could you just say who you are?
Oh, sorry. I'm Holly Hasted. I'm from Nordnorsk Vitensenter, the Science Centre of Northern Norway. Actually, I've been picking crowberries with my husband, and we make a beautiful crowberry wine. It's actually amazing. We have it at Christmas. It's like almost like a port wine. It's fantastic. And I was wondering if, this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but do you think if addressing the commercial opportunities of crowberries would spark the interest of stakeholders, politicians, etc.?
Could we make it an industry instead of an enemy?
So this is where I try to come at that with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But maybe that's for my generation to know what that story is about. But no, it's an idea, absolutely. And I mean, the animals love that berry. The flip side of the coin is that then they spread this plant that has all these negative issues too. But yeah, I might have done some more things on that.
We have a couple of questions down there.
I'm Maria from UIT, do a PhD there. I just had a general communication question, because I would say it's safe to say that most researchers are very bad in communicating their science to the broad public. And I see the problem laid in there that scientists, we are so caught up in our bubbles. And then if you want to communicate to the big audience, we need to get out of the bubble and understand that people outside the bubble do not understand what happens inside the bubble. So my question would be how, or tips or your opinion on how do we get scientists to understand that they need to get outside their bubble to communicate efficiently?
That's a very good question, and I could stay here all day talk about it. But let's hear does anyone want to volunteer to answer this question?
I guess I can just relate. It's really hard. And from my perspective, I don't get to interact so much with a broad audience. So it's an effort to, as I mentioned a bit at the end of my talk, it's an effort we have to make to understand what are the needs also, what are the interests, and which perspective we have to put on our research, our findings, our conclusions, to get the interest, to transmit the knowledge, and to make a point. So, yeah, I don't really have an answer to that, but for sure it's really tricky. And hopefully, I hope through those dissemination channels like videos, social media, exhibits, maybe reaching specific audiences with, like I was mentioning, just this exhibit, which was really interactive with kids, there we can work on this specific perspective for kids and try to aware them of the issues. But it's really hard, for sure. I don't know if any of you want to comment.
Can I ask you, because this is an issue that we meet all the time in Forskning.no, and we interview researchers every day and talk about their science. And for a lot of them, it's the first time. They've never been talked about their science to a broad audience, and it's quite it can be quite daunting to a lot of people. Do you feel that you have sort of any professional communication support around you, or is that something that you would prefer to have more of? Or do you just have to sort of figure out how the wheel works on your own?
Go ahead, please.
No, you stop.
Just personally, I feel like we have people in our institute helping us with communication. Maybe we don't talk enough with them. Maybe we should, but personally, I felt like we have tools. Maybe it's a question of spreading the words and not being shy of asking. Actually, I'm not sure about how to communicate that, and I don't know.
How about you? Because you've been doing this for now 20 years, and it seems like you've been figuring it out on your own. But have you had any sort of, or have you wanted any sort of assistance in this work?
Always.
Yeah.
I've always wanted this, and I've been quite active in trying to get that help. And I got help in the sense that writing up and explaining has not been done necessarily by me, but it's been done by somebody else. But they haven't helped me do it. at the same time, there's just not enough resources for communicating this. So it feels like you're just left there to swim and try and figure out how to do this, not really guided. What has helped a lot is actually to talk with ordinary people, tiring out friends, family, understanding what they understand and what is not. But no, absolutely, it should have been great to be helped more professionally. At the same time, I think, there's so much time in your life, and you need to do that science too. And so, what you need to be professional about. So I like the thought that we can get help and be translated in a way too, because I don't think it's up to anybody to be communicating in a good way. I like to talk about these things, so I have a little bit of help of being what type I am. But I have a lot of colleagues who are not that type, and would need the support. Yeah, so we're not equal, are we?
Yeah. So we have another question.
Hello, I'm Dita. I'm from the University of Greenland. And first of all, thank you for sharing your process on communication. I think communication on research and science is vital, and we have too little of it. Coming from a communications and public affairs background myself, I noticed that the products you are sharing here are what I would define as high threshold communications products. They take quite a big of effort to create. A film is very demanding. So it's also getting into the media if you don't have a great foundation for it yet. So I was wondering if you would share your thoughts on you as researchers and scientists having prospects of becoming your own mediums, your own channels for communications in smaller portions where you go into the already existing debates and reflect and enrich and correct what is already going on there. Because that is where individual power mostly lies these days. Mm-hmm.
Yes, so you're wondering if what your thoughts are on engaging in the already existing debates instead of perhaps producing like videos and more high-level communication content.
Well, basically becoming science influencers.
Yeah.
If we want to use a pop term for it, because we have individual channels, all of us these days. Well, most of us do. And they are seldomly harnessed by researchers to the same extent as to in big business, for instance.
Have any of you thought of doing more sort of personal engagement stuff on social media, or?
I can start. I don't feel comfortable, so I wouldn't do my own channel. It takes me a lot of time if I were to comment on things and be engaged. I think you're very right. I know I should do it. But again, that takes so much effort for me. So it's to stick with my communication in science and focus on my research, get my priority. Again, time.
Yeah, and I guess I can complement what you said by time for sure. It would take an entire job, actually. It could be a function in itself. And then you also mentioned it's the ratio, what I want to put in terms of energy in my research and what I want to put in communication about it. And I think we can all relate, we don't have usually the capacity and the time and energy to combine all. And that's where it's tricky, because you have to make choices. And, well, personally, most of my time is for research, pure research, field work, and collecting data, writing papers. But reaching social media would... First, I don't have the knowledge, actually, if I wanted to do it well. So, yeah, I come back to time, resource.
And I would also assume that being young researchers, it's even more difficult because you really have to focus on getting the qualifications in, filling up your resume, and sort of preparing for and securing your future.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, no pressure.
Sorry.
No, but for sure, you're right. When you're doing research, we expect you to have, do you have papers out? Are you first author? Are you, what have you done for those years? So this is kind of maybe the first questions we would be asked. And if you can also complement with, well, I made this document about, it's very rarely asked, what about communication out of scientific papers, I mean.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions? There is, yeah, please.
Hello, my name is Kine Olsen, and I work as a senior advisor with the United Nations Association of Norway. We're a civil society organization. And I, first of all, want to thank you for your lovely comments and showing us your research. But I'm also wondering, is there any, do you see some potential in your grant applications for including partnerships with civil society in order to help facilitate communication out there, either to youth or other civic society organizations? Is there room for it? Could we be part of your applications?
Does anyone feel, yeah, please.
I think this is something we are trying to do more and more, like to think of this at the start of the project, to include different organizations as partners and to plan better communication activities. I think as the comment before about like this high-level communication formats we have used, it's often also because the project, when you write it, you say, we are going to make a story map, we are going to make a video. And at least for us, then we discovered, okay, but if you want to reach youth, maybe there's better ways to do this. Then you should have a different organization. Maybe you should have a different platform. And I'd say, yeah, the room is definitely there. We're always interested to collaborate. I think like the most boring thing I can do is do some research and then it ends up in the desk and no one ever sees it again. So if this is a way that something can actually be useful, then definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and I think also that what you have shown is the importance of perhaps looking at the whole scope of who you can collaborate with and communicate with. It's not just like the audience through the media, that as well, but also like in your case, the people who needs to actually use this knowledge. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's also a way to think in both collaboration and communication.
And maybe I want to add that for the research I've been part of, building up some kind of knowledge base has been important, because that story map is made as a fundamental part of, for instance, contacting others that would be seeing what this is and understanding it, because you can't just say a whale and you will just hook on. You need to, I think this would be interesting also for you, but you need to read this up and you need to do some job before we get there. And maybe depends a bit. Some things are like weather is more for everybody. Maybe the topic I'm in is for it needs to be like that, maybe for the most specially interested. That not everybody. That's what I wish for in biodiversity and everything, that we start talking about the concrete species and we're taking that knowledge into our daily talk. That's of course, but maybe 10 years from now we do that. I don't know.
Yeah, we can have one more question.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, my name is Simone Ehringfeld. I'm at the Scott Puller Research Institute at the University of Cambridge. I have two connected thoughts. One is that at my university there's a whole media and communications sort of department that I could go to with my research, and if I have a publication coming out, they, if they're interested, would sort of take on the job of how are we going to communicate this to the people. They have the entire network with media, with publications. They know how to put the elephants in the title so that people are, their attention is drawn. Because I've been hearing you talk about time constraints and to what extent can we expect researchers to both be doing their research and their writing and their fieldwork and analyzing the data, but also all the communication stuff. So is it something that we should all be trained in, or should we actually look for ways to outsource this to other people who are specialized in this within universities and institutions? And then another thing, I myself am very passionate about doing my own ways of communicating my research through podcasting. I've made music albums with data. I've done a lot of creative things. But something that I've noticed is that within research and academic spaces, this is often not valued as much. We're very focused on getting the publications out there and having impact in this way. But then when I talk about the podcasts I've put out there, this is something that often drops off of my CV because it's not rated as highly. Do you think that there might be an issue there as well, or what have your experiences been with this? Thank you.
Okay, so being from the university here in Tromsø, what do you think? Should there be more sort of outsourcing of the communication part of science? How much would you like to sort of do yourself? And yeah.
So you need to do parts of it yourself, of course, because you need to communicate and make sure that it's factual, that it's correct into the levels that you can accept in a way for not getting it wrong out there. But yeah, I would. I definitely think when it's ready, when it's mature enough, it's something about that that it has some depth to it, that it's some deeper relevance. So then it could be outsourced. But I think in many stages of at least my development, I think there's things we found that didn't need to be outsourced. If you understand what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much from our fantastic panel and for your presentation. Warm applause for our presenters. And thank you everyone who followed us here at Fram Talks, and also you who followed us on the stream. Thank you very much. It's very good.
Da har du den.
Ja.